Hello everyone! Today's video is on frequently asked questions about the West Highland Way. If you've always wanted to hike the trail but are not sure this is for you, or have loads of practical questions because you're just about to go on this adventure, then I'm hoping to answer a few of your questions. Well, first of all, why do it? Chances are that if you've been looking into long distance walking in Scotland, that is the one trail that you'll have been thinking about hiking. It's showcasing some of Scotland's most beautiful landscapes. The distance is pretty reasonable. 96 miles is a length that is achievable for most fitness levels. There isn't also a lot of steep sections. There are a few, but nothing too tough, so it's accessible to most people. Of course, a lot of people also do it for personal reasons and just to prove to themselves that they are able to walk 96 miles across a few days, and sometimes in very remote areas. So before I share information on practical details regarding the West Highland Way, I would like to share this book with you, which is the Guide to the West Highland Way by Cicerone and written by Terry Marsh. It was of great use to me. It comes with a little waterproof cover, and also with it includes an OS map, which is really the one thing that you need when you're walking the trail. The book itself is great to read when you're preparing for your walk, but I wouldn't say that you needed it while walking, unless you like to walk and have a look at the historical description on each of the ruins and the different villages that you might walk past. If you're quite conscious about the weight that you're carrying, then really the OS map is all you need. I should also say that because the way is so well waymarked, really, in actual fact, you don't really need the map, but it's always good practice to take a map with you, and also not to just rely on your phone and apps such as View Ranger or GPS tracker, because you never quite know what might happen. So one of the first practical questions you might ask yourself is when to go. The terrain itself doesn't really prevent you from walking it at any time of the year, but the seasons, depending what they are, make it a little bit less or more enjoyable. I personally walked away at the end of September, and there are a few things that influence my choice. So most people would walk the West Highland Way from early May to late October. The reason for that being that the weather is the most stable and nicest up here in Scotland, although it has to be said that weather here in Scotland is very unpredictable, so you should be preparing for anything from beautiful sunshine to rain, storm, and who knows, perhaps even some snow. There are also other things that you should be taking into account on top of the weather. Things like the lambing season, as well as deer stalking. The reason why those two things matter is because they might mean that your route will be diverted, in which case there would be loads of signposting along the way to keep you on the right path. The other thing that might influence your decision, other than the weather or farming activity, is the amount of people that you are quite happy to cope with on the trail. July and August are definitely the busiest seasons, because that's when people tend to be on holidays, and that's when people expect the weather to be at its best. I personally didn't want to see as many people as I might have in July and August, and you might not want to either. So definitely, if you want to avoid the crowds, then go either late spring or early autumn. The last two things that are to be taken into account are midges and ticks, because those two elements are influenced by temperature, and both tend to be present during the warmer months. So now on to itinerary planning. And by that I mean how many days you might complete your walk in. And that's something that is very personal. I would say that from researching and also from talking to people along the way, I have found that most walkers do it from as little as, well, actually I met someone who did it in 22 hours during one of the running challenge, to as much as something like 10 days. Although the average person takes about 7 to 8 days. The things that will really influence the length of your hike will be the amount of kilometers you're happy to do every day. In order to complete the West Highland Way in as little as 4 or 5 days, you'll of course have to have much longer days and be ready to, at times, pack in distance as well as height on the same day. Wild camping also means that you're much more flexible in terms of when your day begins and ends, and you can really just keep going as long as you're able to until you find a nice wild camping spot. But some other people will prefer to walk very, very long days if it means that they can stay in a very nice B&B at night. Ultimately, the walk needs to be what you want it to be and not a chore, because chances are you'll have had to take days off from your work in order to fit the time in, and so therefore be sure that you're planning for enough days depending on your fitness levels and the challenge you want to give yourself. And if you are planning on walking the way with friends or family, make sure that they're all agreeing with the length of the walk that you've decided on, because there's nothing worse than, you know, planning everything for a 6 days walk and then finding out that people around you are not able to do it in that speed, or on the contrary, that most people just want to keep going further and others are slowing them down. Some people might be wondering where they can resupply along the way, and by that I mean buying food or buying some gear items that you might have forgotten at home, or repair kits, that sort of thing. So anywhere that has an actual shop. I would say that from Milgai and all the way to Drimmen, which for some people, you know, the average person, is generally speaking the first night, then there isn't really any shop for you to stop at. So be sure that you have what you need leaving Milgai for the day after. After Milgai, the next shop that is directly on the way is the one in Balmaha. So there is an area just after the car park, after Conic Hill, where you'll find a nice pub and a shop, and that shop has a cash machine as well. After Balmaha, there isn't very much until you get to the Beinglas campsite. After Beinglas, which is in Inverarnen, you go through to Crianlarich, where unless you make a detour and go actually into Crianlarich, there is nothing. And when you get to Tindrum, there's quite a few shops there. There is the Green Welly stop, which has pretty much, you know, everything you might need, and there's also a small newsagent called Brody's. After Tindrum, the only real shop that you will be able to find that is directly on the way is in Kinlochleven, so quite a fair amount of miles after that. And then from Kinlochleven, usually that last day will take you to Fort William, so at that point you'll have access to more shops. The list of shops where you'll be able to find most of the things you might need, as well as in some cases some hiking gear, and that are directly on the way, which means do not need you to make any detour, are in Milgai, Balmaha, Inverarnen, Tindrum, Kinlochleven, and then at the very end in Fort William. Sometimes people make the mistake of packing way too much, and that's why sometimes you need a post office to post some stuff either up to Fort William or back home. If you live somewhere close enough, that postage is not going to cost you a whole lot of money. So for those of you that might need a post office along the way, those are the locations where you'll find one, either directly on the trail or a few kilometers off the trail. So leaving a Milgai, there is one. Then the next one is in Drimmen. I think you'll need to do an extra 1 kilometer off the trail in order to get there. After Drimmen, the next one is Crian Larrick, which also is not on the trail. And then after that, in Tindrum, which is directly on the trail. Past Tindrum, the next post office is in Bridge of Orchy. The next one is in Kinlochleven, which is quite a big town, you know, for Scottish Highland standards. And then in the final destination in Fort William. So onto the subject of money and how much you should budget for your hike. Well, again, as with everything else, it depends on the type of hike you've chosen to do. If you're wild camping, then and also taking all your food with you, then of course you'll need less money than if you're stopping into towns and staying in a hotel and planning on having a nice meal every day. So what I recommend is, depending on how long your hike is going to be, what your itinerary is take £20 a day in cash with you. That will cover things like meals, any resupply you might need, and those campsite fees. Luckily, the West Highland Way is not that remote, so you'll also be able to withdraw some cash along the way if you find that something like £20 a day is not enough. Certainly, I ended up using cash machines. The cash machines you'll have access to directly on the way are in Milgai, Tindrum, Kinlochleven and Fort William. So in terms of public transport, the most straightforward way to get to Milgai is to take a train from Glasgow, and that takes about 20 minutes. And in Fort William, you can just get back down to the Central Belt, also by train. The other option, if you want to break your hike into different sections and come back, is to use the West Highland Railway line, which goes all the way from Glasgow and all the way up Loch Lomond. The West Highland Way is a very social trail. If you're thinking about hiking it on your own, or even if you're going, if it's a few of you going, then chances are you will meet people. And what's really nice about it is that when you start, you sort of, along the day, you sort of identify who's also started on that day, and you keep on seeing those people every day along your hike. And that's just really, really nice, because you can sort of check on each other, and chances are you'll be staying in the same place at night, so you can have a drink or share dinner, and that's also what makes the West Highland Way really special. So some of you might be wondering how remote the West Highland Way can get at times, especially if you're planning on doing it on your own. I didn't think that it was really remote. I mean, the only two times where I felt a little bit more isolated were in Rannochmore, particularly between Bridge of Orchy and King's House. And the second time where I also felt, I was further away from, a village or cars or whatever, was on the old military road between Kinlochleven and Fort William. There are a few things that you can do in order to prevent you catching ticks. First of all, you're more likely to get them if you have more skin exposed. So, if you wear shorts, then obviously you're more prone to getting them. Or if you have tops without sleeves, that kind of thing. The other thing that you can do in order to try and prevent you getting ticks, particularly if you're a woman, is try and not go for a pee in the wild where there are really high bushes, because that's where the ticks are. They basically go at the very, very end of a leaf or of a sort of strand of grass, and then they go on you when you start walking on the trail. So if you notice a lot of bushes, high bushes right next to the trail, that's where you need to have a bit of a lookout. I usually tend to take my walking poles and sort of do this to the bushes on the side of the trail in order to be less in contact with the vegetation. Ultimately, if you do get a tick, then that's not the end of the world. What you need to do is make sure that every night, and possibly every morning as well if you're camping, you check yourself for ticks everywhere. There are two different types of tick removers that I've come across. One is a sort of tweezer-like device, and the other one is the size of a credit card, and that's the one that I have. With the tweezer, you have to turn them anti-clockwise, and that apparently stresses the tick out quite a lot. Whereas with the tick card, you remove them really gently, and if they do carry Lyme's disease, then they are less likely to eject that inside your blood as you remove them. And one of the things that I learned talking to some of the people who work around tick prevention, or Lyme's disease prevention I should say, is that only 5% of the ticks that are around in Scotland carry Lyme's disease. So your chances of getting that disease are reduced by the fact that it's only a small proportion of ticks that carry it. The other sort of little beasties that will be really annoying on the trail are midges. They are harmless. You're not gonna get anything out of, being stung, but it's just really uncomfortable. So the way that you can prevent suffering from midges too much are, first of all, deciding when to go. If you go on the much warmer months, then of course you'll have more midges around you. And secondly, making sure that you buy a good product to protect you against them. Midges is a very good one. It's sort of one of the latest ones that's on the market, and people say it works really well. I think that the moments where you'll suffer mostly from midges are at night and in the morning when the sun goes down and rises, so mostly around camp. I have not suffered from midges actually walking because they can't keep up with the speed. They can't get any speed, and also the wind really bothers them because they have tiny little wings and they just don't cope well in windy situation. Oh, and the last thing is of course having a net. Like some people buy a head net. It's not particularly attractive, but it works really well, and that way you don't have to put any product on your skin in case you're allergic to those type of products. I've never felt unsafe at any point. I always felt like I was surrounded by really lovely people, and that, I was never really too far from help. I also made sure to let people know where I was and the progress on my route. And really, generally speaking, I didn't find that the Scottish Highlands were a place, where there was any danger around me at any point. Of course, sometimes you find yourself in situations and you might get unlucky, but generally speaking, I wouldn't say that it's particularly dangerous for women hiking the trail on their own. I did a previous video on the gear that I took on the West Highland Way, so I'm not going to talk about this too much, but in terms of the shoes, which is really, every item is important, in a way, but many people wonder what type of shoes they should be wearing while walking. There's two types of shoes you see mostly on the trail, so trail runners and hiking boots. Both are, valid and work for people depending on what you like. I much prefer trail runners. In terms of the terrain itself, you're fine in trail runners. It doesn't require, big boots or crampons or any of that. It's totally accessible. What I like about trail runners, and you'll be able to find so many videos that will detail the pros and cons of trail runners versus hiking boots. So again, not the expert, and much more information to be found elsewhere. But what I will say is that when it gets wet, I like trail runners much better because they will just dry much faster. So your feet will get wet one way or another. If you're wearing hiking boots, they will get wet too, because chances are one day will rain, or you'll just have to cross a river or whatever, and hiking boots take so much longer to dry. And also your feet inside the hiking boots will stay wet all day long, which will mean that you'll have more chances of getting blisters by the end of the day. And that is one of the main reasons why I choose trail runners. So at the end of your hike, arriving into Fort William, you will most definitely need an evening to recover, and probably a nice pint of beer or whatever you fancy. And I recommend the Ben Nevis Inn, just at the foot of Ben Nevis. It's a lovely walk at night. You will need a head torch and a lovely atmosphere in there. And I think every Tuesday night they have a live band. So anyway, the day after, if you're not quite ready to go home, then there are 3 things that I would recommend. Either go up Ben Nevis, which is the highest mountain in the UK. There are 2 routes to go up there. You can take the pony track, which is the track that most people go up to, and it's the most straightforward way up. Or you can use the CMD arête, which is much more challenging but much more rewarding, and probably only suited for more experienced hikers. The second activity which I would recommend is go to the Steyl waterfalls just by the Nevis Gorge, and that's the highest waterfall in Scotland with a 120-meter drop. The third activity, if you're not too tired after the West Highland Way and fancy pushing further up north and wanting to tackle another long distance trail, is the Great Glen Way, which goes from Fort William to Inverness. So it's a coast-to-coast trail, which is 117 kilometers long. So I hope this video has been helpful. I've tried to cover quite a range of subjects, and probably the most likely questions you'll have before walking the West Highland Way. If there are any other things that you're interested in finding out about that you think I could help with, then please comment below and I'll try and help. Thank you very much for watching, and see you later.